Europe 1519. A throne stands empty. Not just any throne, but the throne of the Holy Roman Empire, one of the most powerful political institutions in Europe. For centuries, this empire had shaped the destiny of the continent. Its emperor commanded influence over vast lands stretching across Central Europe. Now the ruler was dead, and 7 men would decide who would take his place. 2 kings were ready to fight for the crown. One was Francis I of France, bold, ambitious, and determined to expand French power across Europe. The other was Charles V, a young ruler who already controlled Spain and powerful territories in Europe. But neither king truly controlled the election, because behind the scenes stood a man whose power did not come from armies or crowns. His power came from money. His name was Jakob Fugger. 7 months ago, we explored how Fugger rose from a merchant family to become the richest banker in Europe. But today we uncover the moment his wealth changed the course of history, the moment when a banker helped decide who would rule an empire. The crisis began with the death of Maximilian I. Maximilian had ruled the empire for decades. He had fought wars, negotiated alliances, and struggled constantly with one problem: money. Running an empire was expensive, and Maximilian had relied heavily on loans. One of the men who financed him again and again was Jakob Fugger. Now that Maximilian was gone, the empire needed a new emperor. But unlike many kingdoms, empire did not simply pass from father to son. Instead, the emperor was elected. 7 powerful princes, known as the prince-electors, held the right to vote. This men understood that their decision would shape the future of Europe. And they also understood something else. Their votes were extremely valuable. Soon the election turned into a contest between 2 of the most powerful rulers in Europe. On one side stood Francis I of France. Francis was charismatic, confident, and determined to expand French influence across the continent. He believed that becoming emperor would make France the dominant power in Europe. On the other side stood Charles V. Despite being young, Charles already ruled a vast collection of territories inherited from his family. He controlled Spain, the Netherlands, and land across Europe. But Charles had a problem. He was drawn in debt. Running his kingdoms had drained his treasury, and the election campaign required enormous sums of money. Without financial support, he had little chance of winning. That was when he turned to Jakob Fugger. By this time, Fugger had built a financial empire unlike anything Europe had seen before. From his base in Augsburg, his banking network stretched across the continent. He controlled trade, invested in mines, and lent money to kings and emperors. Silver and copper from his mining operations flowed through Europe's market, bringing him enormous wealth. Rulers depended on him when they needed money for wars, armies, or political ambitions. And now Charles V needed him more than ever. Fugger agreed to help, but helping a king become emperor would require staggering amounts of money. The campaign that followed would become one of the most expensive political contests Europe had ever seen. Behind closed doors, negotiations began. The prince-electors made their representatives from both candidates. Each elector expected gifts, promise, and guarantees. Francis I spent heavily to win their support. But Charles had something even more powerful: Fugger's financial backing. Through loans arranged by Fugger and other bankers, Charles suddenly had access to vast sums of money. Gold flowed through the empire, promises were made, deals were struck, influence quietly shifted. The election had become a battle not of armies, but of wealth. Finally, in the summer of 1519, the prince-electors gathered to make their choice. The future of the Holy Roman Empire hung in the balance. After weeks of negotiation and pressure, the decision was announced. Charles V had been elected emperor. At only 19 years old, he now ruled one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. His territory stretched from Spain to Central Europe and across the Atlantic to the Americas. But many people understood something important. Behind the young emperor stood the banker who had financed his rise, Jakob Fugger. Fugger never ruled a kingdom. He never led soldiers into battle, yet his influence reached into the highest levels of European politics. The new empire owed him enormous debts, and in return, Fugger gained privilege and influence that strengthened his financial empire even further. At one point, historians estimate that his fortune equaled roughly 2% of Europeans' entire economic output. In today's terms, that level of wealth would make someone one of the richest individuals in history. Yet, Fugger also used some of his wealth to support his hometown. He built the Fuggeri, a community that provided affordable housing for poor citizens. Remarkably, it still exists today. But Fugger's influence reached beyond politics and economics. During this period, the Catholic Church was raising money through the sale of indulgence. Some of this money passed through financial networks connected to Fugger's banking empire. The practice would soon anger a German monk named Martin Luther. In 1517, Luther challenged the church and sparked the movement that became known as the Protestant Reformation. This religious revolution would divide Europe for generations, and indirectly, the finance world that Fugger helped build was connected to the tensions that fueled it. Jakob Fugger never wore a crown. He never commanded armies, but in the 1519, his wealth helped decide who would rule the Holy Roman Empire. History revealed a new truth about power. Kings might command armies, but the people who control money can influence the fate of empires. And for a moment in history, the most powerful man in Europe was not a king, it was a banker.